Spring Bulbs Update. G'day my lovelies and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you haven't been here before. I'm Kathy and today I wanted to give you guys an update on how my spring bulbs did and the aftercare I gave them. Now last year I bought bulbs for the first time and I recorded 2 videos on how I planted them, and I'll link them somewhere up here for anyone who is interested in how I did that. In fact, there are 2 videos and I'll also list them in my description box below. For those who aren't aware, I'm in Australia and our spring starts on the 1st of September and ends on the 30th of November. And our autumn, when we normally plant our bulbs, starts 1st of March to the end of May. In Melbourne, we generally plant our spring bulbs in May or very late April to early May, depending upon how cold it is. Surprisingly, it is the last day in April today and it is 24 degrees, which is almost unheard of. And in fact, we're going to have several very nice days, but I think after that, it's going to be cold, and that is usually the best time to plant our spring bulbs. Now, most of this video is going to be showing you how the bulbs progressed, the ones that I planted last May. I took photos as well as video footage, and I'm going to show you from when they started sprouting to when they started dying off. And after that, I will tell you how I looked after my bulbs and what aftercare I gave them. it seemed to me that I think all of the bulbs actually bloomed. So I was really ecstatic to see them all coming up, and they did look absolutely stunning. I cannot deny it. I think out of all though, my favorites were the freesias because they were just so colorful and they lasted a lot longer than say the tulips or the daffodils. They were all beautiful, but can I say that I'm not as impressed with bulbs as I thought I would be. The blooms really don't last very long, particularly the tulips and daffodils. The freesias lasted the longest, but they were also the ones that bloomed last out of the three. And now I can't deny that they're all beautiful, really stunning, but seems like a hell of a lot of work and expense because bulbs are not cheap for really a very small showing. So I don't know if I'm going to invest in any further bulbs in the future. Well, definitely not now. So the way I cared for my blooms is when they started sprouting, I gave them a bit more fertilizer, I watered them more often, I even sprayed them occasionally with sea salt. Once the blooms started dying, and really I think I waited until the blooms had almost completely died, I then cut off the blooms, but I left all the foliage. And if you have bulbs, please don't cut off the foliage. That is how the bulbs draw energy for the next year's blooms. And if you cut off the foliage, they won't have enough energy to bloom. So it is extremely important that you leave the foliage to die off naturally. I'll admit they looked really ugly for quite a bit of time, but unfortunately that is just the price we pay for spring bulbs. That's another thing I really didn't like, is I had these pots full of this quite ugly dying foliage that I had to leave until it completely died back. Once it did, then I would cut it off, but most times I found I could simply just pull the foliage, it would come away from the bulb. The aftercare that bulbs require will depend upon where you live. If you live somewhere where it gets extremely cold, then you can leave the bulbs, say, in the ground or in the pots. Melbourne is temperate to cool. Once all the foliage has died off and you have cut it off, you will then have to lift your bulbs, store them, say, in something that is breathable like paper bags, and put them somewhere where it is cool and dry. I actually decided not to do that. I decided to leave my bulbs in the pots, and what I did is I covered the tops of the pots with fabric rags, and then I stored my pots in the garage where it is cool and dry. Now, if we had had an extremely hot summer, I might not have done that, but we had an extremely cool summer this last year, and I thought they might be okay. One thing I forgot to mention is that you do not water or fertilize your bulbs whilst they are in storage. That will have to wait until you put them out again for next year's blooms. Say in Australia or Melbourne, we put them out in May. That is when I will need to fertilize and water them again. But from November to May, I did not water them and I did not fertilize them. From what I have read, if it does not get sufficiently cold, then bulbs need to be pre-chilled, and that is by putting them, say, in a paper bag and storing them in your fridge for 6 to 8 weeks before you plant them out, whether you plant them in soil or whether you plant them in pots, which means that you would have to pre-chill them in Melbourne, say, from mid-March. I decided not to do that. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to see if my bulbs would rebloom just by staying in the pots that they were in. I thought that was similar conditions to being planted in soil. I will be putting my 2 pots of bulbs out on my deck again in full sun. I will give them fertilizer and I'll give them some water. And I guess we will find out in spring if I succeeded or failed. I really don't know. I probably messed them all up, but that was okay. Really, if it doesn't work, I'm not going to be devastated, but I would love to see them rebloom because they were beautiful. I think that next year I'm actually going to plant all the bulbs in my garden rather than keeping them in pots. That's what I'm intending anyway. Let me know if you have any spring bulbs. I would love to hear your experience with them. I will admit that I was not as impressed as I expected to be. Not because the blooms weren't stunning, because they were, but too much work really for such a small showing. And spring is usually so cold in Melbourne that I didn't really get to spend enough time out in the garden to appreciate them. Perhaps that is another reason why I'm reluctant to get more spring bulbs. I much prefer perennials that just bloom their heads off for months on end rather than the expense and bother that you need to go to with bulbs. However, that is not to say I don't understand why people love them so much. I just don't know if they're going to be for me. Perhaps in the future. I really don't know. I don't rule it out. But at this point, these are the only bulbs that I'm going to be experimenting with. So let me know what you think of my bulbs and the way I've been looking after them. I'm sure I'm doing it all wrong, but like I said, this is all an experiment. And you can put it down in the comments or you can contact me on Instagram. Thank you guys so very much for hanging out with me. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, you can give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to my channel as it helps my channel to grow. I hope you all have a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye. My cat's distracting me. Can you hear the plane? God, and I will keep you guys updated on whether that happens or not. God. What I did. Fungus gnats. I might change my name. Oh, that's it, and that is a mess.